So the point of our gather talk today is on the next slide, if you want to go to that. And this should be a pretty familiar verse, right? And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Does anybody know who said that? The book's named after him, right? It's Joshua. So go to the next slide. Joshua, good job. So we go to the next slide. We know this guy, right? Got the book named after him. He said that quote. And he was one of the 2 spies that the Israelites sent into the promised land. Does anybody know the other one? Caleb. Good job. And he was the other spy. So there are 2 of them that said, we can take this land. It was Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua is famous because he has the book, the leader of the Israelites after Moses. And he said that verse. But Caleb lived out that verse. Not to say Joshua didn't, but Caleb is kind of this, we know some things about him, but he doesn't have a book named after him, right? We don't read from the book of Caleb. It's kind of sad because he's a pretty good role model for us. So we're going to explore the life of Caleb today. And most of Caleb's story can be found in Numbers 13 and 14, if anybody wants to follow along. If not, just close your eyes, listen to my soothing voice, fall asleep. That's all right. So Caleb, in the Hebrew, means a whole bunch of different things. And one of the translations is something along the lines of faithful, zealous, ruthless, bold, and brave. So my guess is that Caleb had a little bit of an anger streak to him, a really passionate streak to him. We'll see in the story, he gets kind of riled up when people don't make very good decisions. So you go to the next slide. 6 times it is said of Caleb, he faithfully followed the Lord. And there are a lot of really good leaders, really good role models in the scripture. But many of them make all kinds of bad decisions along the path of making some good decisions. Caleb, though, remains faithful throughout his entire story. So as we talk about why we gather today, we're going through these different elements of why we gather. And today we're going to be talking about number 2, which is we gather to decide. All right, because we have to decide today who we will serve. All right, so we're going to start off our story of Caleb in Numbers 13, right off the bat. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. For each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. So if you're not familiar with where we are, they've gotten out of Egypt, right? Moses has led them out of Egypt, and they're about to take the land that God had promised to them. And so he's going to send out a spy, a scout from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is basically going to be story time with Trent, so a lot of verses that we're reading together. So you can either read along or listen to my voice. All right, so next slide. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. And I apologize in advance for my poor pronunciation of all these Old Testament names and places. So Caleb is he's the son of Jephunneh, I think. Steve Johnson, our pastor back home, would be making fun of me for all my poor pronunciation. He's a Greek and Hebrew scholar, and so he knows what he's talking about. But that is a tribe not originally from Israel. He's basically adopted into the Israelite clan, into the tribe of Judah. We can go back to Genesis chapter 15. I don't have to read this to you, but it basically makes the point that the land of the Kenizzites, the underlined tribe there, that's his tribe. He came from this other people. And if we go to, let me make this point. Genesis 15, they live in the land that is eventually going to be the Israelites. So they're part of the people that are going to lose their land. And somehow Caleb made it over to the Israelites. Somewhere along the way, he said, wow, these people, they're blessed by God, or they know what they're doing, or they're big and powerful, or something. And he says, we got to join this tribe. And so then we go to 1 Chronicles, sons of Caleb, the sons of Jephunneh. And that just goes and tells us more about how he incorporated back into the tribe of Judah. He was not originally of the people of God. He's kind of an adopted son into the people of God. And there's a verse in John 1:47. And this is a pretty well-used verse as well. And it talks about Nathanael. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Everyone heard that before? This is a true Israelite. Ever heard that? No? That's okay. Basically, Jesus is just saying, out of all the people that are Israelites, this is a true Israelite. This is a true Jew. And that's what we see in Caleb here. Caleb is not normally from this family, this tribe, but he represents them. He gets sent out on behalf of the entire clan of Judah to scout the area. So somewhere along the way, he went from an outsider, part of a people group that they were going to take over, to the leader of that tribe. So lesson one that we can learn from Caleb is that you connect your people. He incorporated his people into Judah to give them a better future, to give them better hope, to give them, what we'll find out later, a legacy in the tribe of Judah. All right, so now we go back to Moses. He says, whether the land is rich or poor, he's sending his tribe out, right? His scouts out. Whether it's rich or poor, whether there are trees in it or not. There might be no trees. That'd be kind of desolate. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. So Moses says, all right, this land is ours. Be courageous. Go tell us what's out there. And then what they do, does anybody remember? They go out and they're super courageous and they take over the land immediately. No. They come back and they say, however, the people who dwell in it in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. If you go to the next slide. Like, yeah, I know we're supposed to take it over, but it looks scary. And there are already people there, so let's just give up and go home. It's the opposite of courage, right? What Moses told him to do. So, but there are two spies, right? Even though most of them come back and say, we should just give up and go home. Two spies, one of them being Caleb, says, but Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Now I imagine that the entire walk home, they were debating about this, right? And so Caleb and Joshua were arguing with the other 10 the entire way home, saying, yeah, we just got to give up and go home. And so I imagine Joshua and Caleb, being the passionate people they are arguing with them the entire time. Because I doubt that they wouldn't have this conversation on the way back. So Caleb, I imagine, his rage meter, he's going to go full Hulk. You know the Hulk, the green guy, rips his clothes. He's going to go full Hulk here in a couple of verses. But for now, he's trying to stay calm. He says, listen, quiet. We can do this. Then the men who had gone up with him, this is the other 10 people, said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So I'm guessing this is just a continuation of this argument that they've been having all the way back to Moses. And they're still fighting about it. Caleb and Joshua are saying, no, we can do this. Everyone else says, no, they're too strong. Just go back home. Then we go to verse 14. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night, and all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or we would have died in this wilderness." This is kind of a repeat of Jonah again, right? From verse 4, sitting out there in the desert, whining. So they're so depressed, they're so convinced that they can't do what God told them they could do, that they just wish they could die. This is a reoccurring theme, right, in the Old Testament, people getting so depressed. Well, they whine, like, if only I could just go and die in the desert. And then they go to the next verse. "Why is the Lord bringing us into the land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" Then they get an idea. And they said to one another, "Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt." We just spent several books getting out of Egypt, if you don't recall. And they're so depressed, they're so convinced that they can't do the thing that God told them that they could do, that they just want to pick a new leader and go back. Then Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of, again, I apologize, Jephunneh? Jeff, we'll go Jeff, thank you, appreciate that. Son of Jeff, who were among those who had spied on the land, tore their clothes. All right, so Caleb's going Hulk now. I think he's had enough of the whining, of the let's go die in the desert, let's go back to being slaves. And they start tearing their clothes. He's going full Hulk now. And he said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, "The land which we passed through to spy it out is exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, and a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us." This is my new favorite insult. You are bread. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. He says it twice. Do not fear them. Repeating what Moses had told to them when they went out to scout the land. Do not fear. Be of courage. They are bread. And then the next verse, "Then all the congregations said to stone them with stones." This is like, so poor Joshua and Caleb, right? They're really trying to rally their people. Really trying, like, no, we got this. Don't be afraid. We got this. We just got out of Egypt. We were slaves. Do you remember the big fireball that came down? Remember the sea that split? You remember those things? We can do this. They're like, no. We want to whine and we want to go back and die. And stop telling us to be courageous. We're going to stone you. Throw stones at you. We're so upset. This is like Jonah all over again, right? But Joshua and Caleb stood up anyway, because they believed that God was faithful to his promise and that they would obtain the land that was promised to them. And so the second lesson we can learn from Caleb is protect your people. It would have been really easy for Joshua and Caleb to say, "You're right. Let's just go back. Here, let's pick a new leader. One of the people that said we can't do it. Let's go die in the desert or die in Egypt." There's so many options, right? They didn't care where. But Caleb and Joshua stood up to an angry crowd. They were so passionate that they ended up going full Hulk, ripping their clothes. And the people were so angry that they were willing to stone them on the spot. Now, we're not going to go into the story of Moses and wandering in the desert, but at this point, basically, God's like, you know what? Forget those people. Moses, Aaron, Caleb, Joshua, why don't the five of us hang out and we'll start a country? If you remember, and you can read about that in chapter 14 if you want. Moses intercedes and he says, no, we're going to protect our people. So again, Moses is protecting his people. But eventually Moses reasons with God and he says, okay, I won't kick all these people out. They can still be a part of Israel, I guess. But then he says this of Caleb. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. So this is the part where God kicks them out, right? And they have to go wander around in the desert. And everyone that said they couldn't do it does die out in the desert. So a little self-fulfilling prophecy there. But Caleb and Joshua, who came back and said, we can do this, end up inheriting that land. And so there's a little gap here in Caleb's story, right? Because they got to wander around the desert for a while. They got to make up some rules. They got to fight some people along the way. And eventually we get to Joshua chapter 13. And this is where we start seeing the Israelites take over their land. In Joshua chapter 13, verse 1, they have already taken over some of the land, but the conquest is not done. They've been working at it for many years. But Joshua's getting old, right? And God told him that. He says, when Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, you are now very old. And Joshua was like, thanks for pointing that out. And there are still very large areas of land to be taken over. And we'll skip to verse 7. He has a little conversation with Joshua. And then he wants them to divide it as an inheritance among the 9 tribes and half of the tribes of Massa. Let's go Manny. Massa. It's like Nassau. Don't worry about it. I know. I'm sorry. So they haven't completely taken over the land. But Joshua's getting old. Joshua's getting tired. And if you remember, 10 of these tribes didn't even think they could do it to begin with. And so they just gather and they're like, hey, good enough. Let's just divide up what we got. All right, everyone gets a piece. We'll just settle for what we got and, kind of move along. But as we move down to Joshua chapter 7, Joshua 14, chapter 7, this is Caleb. Caleb's still around, right? Because he believed in the promise that God had given him, that they would have this land. And he says, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from that area to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the heart of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now, then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said do this to Moses. Well, Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. So Caleb's still kicking, right? He's still leading his tribe of Judah. He's probably one of the head leaders now. He was a scout 45 years ago. And now he's in charge of Judah. And he's 85 years old. And everyone else is saying, hey, this is good enough. Let's just divide the land we got, move on. There's some trees, some milk and honey. We're good. Caleb says, no. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now than I was then. Now give me the hill country that the Lord promised to me that day. So 45 years later, after all the other people that he grew up with have died out in the desert, he's 85 years old. And while everyone else the new leaders of all these tribes are squabbling over the land that they already got, he says, hey, that looks really difficult. I'll take that. Because God promised that we would have this land. So the third lesson we can take from Caleb here is that you equalize your people. He could have very easily said, I was like one of the 5 faithful people back 45 years ago. I'm good. I'll take this land. You guys go get the rest of it. But he didn't. He said, I still believe in God's promise. I'm going to go with my people to fulfill that promise. So it's really easy to rest back on your past successes, right? And Caleb has had a lot of them, but he didn't. And so these three lessons that we learned through Caleb, we can look at how that has affected the entire tribe of Judah, right? Because he's in charge of Judah now. So if we go on the next slide, we can just start exploring the legacy of Caleb. The first one is Judges. If you're familiar with the book of Judges, Judges is when Israel is starting to decay into chaos. And so there are people rising up they call judges to help bring the people back to God and help settle disputes and help bring stability there. And the very first judge is Caleb's younger brother. And I'm not going to read all these verses, but I'm going to leave them up for you so you can go and look at them if you care to follow the path of Caleb through here. After the first judge, I'm going to read this one because I think this is pretty powerful. This is where the Israelites have to fight another tribe. The Israelites went up to Bethel and inquired of God. They said, who of us should go first to fight against the Benjamites? The Lord replied, Judah shall go first. And that's Caleb's tribe. And usually it's funny because a lot of times God is like, well, do this. How many people should I take? Oh, make them taste water. Oh, who should I take with me? Oh, throw lots. But when it comes to who to send first, he's like, yeah, send Judah. The rest of you, I wanted to get rid of. Make a tribe out of Moses and Aaron and Caleb and Joshua. Right? So even now, Judah still leads Israel. And then, next slide. Does anybody remember David? He's a character in the Bible. He deals with sheep, and then giants, and then he's a king, and then makes some questionable moral decisions. But David's tribe is from Judah. And then if we go to 1 Kings, next slide, I won't bore you with the history lesson here, but eventually Israel splits up, right? And we have the northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judah. And which kingdom stood by the reign of David, the line of David? Judah. So even now, they're staying loyal to God's promise for their people. And the one verse I want to point out here is, ever since that day, the people of Israel have opposed David's family. So the tribe of Judah remains faithful to David and to David's eventual kin. And then when both kingdoms fall, we see a story of Daniel. Do you remember the story of Daniel? Something about lions, right? Roar. That's the sound lions make. Daniel also comes from Judah. See, there's just a beautiful trend here. And then after Daniel, I'm going to read this verse for us from Micah. But you, O Bethlehem, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is the ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from ancient days. And that's referring to, of course, Jesus, who comes through the line of David, who comes through Judah. And in the early formation of the church, James, brother of Jesus, is a leader in early Jerusalem church. And even now, he's urging people, come near to God, and he will come near to you. And then at the very end, we'll go to the very back of the book, so we've gone through the whole thing. In Revelation, the one of the elders said to me, weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered. And all of this from one man, Caleb, who believed in God's promise for his life, for his people, and decided that day, me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So Joshua said it, but Caleb lived it. And we can see that transcend through all of Scripture as Judah continues to play a prominent role in everything that God has done through them since. So the two questions to ask yourselves today. How will you decide in your gatherings? Because back when the Israelites were going to take over the land, they listened to 10 scared voices instead of 2 courageous ones. And that made all the difference for that tribe. So how will you decide? In fear or in courage? And the second question I have for you, what kind of good authority do you need to uphold? A lot of times we think that if we're a welcoming, laissez-faire kind of leader, that's better, right? People don't like to be told what to do. But the best leaders are the ones that uphold the good, but do it generously. And that's what Caleb and Joshua did. They said, this is what we need to do. And it might hurt your feelings. You might want to stone us. I need to get a new shirt because I ripped mine. But this is what we need to do. So how do you connect your people? How do you protect them? And how do you equalize them so all of them have equal opportunity in God's promise for your gathering? So once again, that's my professorship coming now. I don't have answers for you. But as you think about the legacy of Caleb and how his decision back when they were entering the promised land affected the entire legacy of the tribe of Judah. Think about the decisions you're making today, the gatherings you're making, the houses you're making, the communities you're making will have long-term effects, not just on those communities, but the world that they engage with. So the challenge today is the same challenge, the same quote that we started with, which is, but for me, let me start at the beginning. And it is of evil in your eyes to serve the Lord. Choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.